All right, welcome back guys, and today I wanted to show you a little trick that I found over the years that's really helpful when making pullmax tooling. The way I used to do it, and I think a lot of people still do it, is they'll take like a pin gauge like this, and we're just going to use the center section of this Cadillac hood because this is actually a piece of tooling I need to make. So I'll show you kind of how I used to do it and how I currently do it and show you kind of the differences. So we're going to just use the area on this hood that I need to make. So I'll show you the way I used to do it was a pin gauge here, and we would kind of come down and transfer that on there. But the problem is these pin gauges aren't smooth, and if I bump it a little bit, it'll move. So I don't like to do it that way because that's where you make mistakes, and you can't really judge the gap of the tool by holding it up to the light. So what I like to do now, and we're going to do in this video, is we're going to build a clay dam around the nicest section of the body line or profile we need, and we're going to cast a mold to get an accurate representation of the body line we need. So that's super beneficial because I've got a couple here that are very simple. So when we go to make it, this is the cast out of body filler, then we can lay that out on our piece of material we're going to make the tool out. We can scribe that super nice and clean, and then while we're machining it, we can hold it up to the light and we can check the fit. That way we can use this as our gauge that doesn't move, it's nice and smooth, and we can save it forever. And then from there you can take in this instance, it would be the male die and transfer that into a female die. So that's kind of how I can get accurate, complex tooling. The one on the hood is going to be very simple compared to stuff like this 33, 34 windshield opening. So stick around as I show you how I cast a mold of our profile we need to make. And this is very handy for doing other things than just body line profiles. Like if you have a recessed area where a badge sits or an emblem or a door handle recess, you can do the exact same process. And sometimes, depending on what the material is and the depth and the material you're casting in, you can actually make a hammer form or even a press die. Say you're using like a two-part resin that you can reinforce. So stick around, I'll make the dam, we'll cast the profile we need here and go all the way into making the tooling. So first thing we need to do is find the smoothest area of our profile, which luckily on this, the hood's in pretty good shape. So anywhere's good. And what I like to usually do next is I use just like an air dry modeling clay to build our dam work. But there are other options. You can use tape, you can use cardboard. In this instance, just because when I pulled the clay out, it had dried out and I was kind of in a pinch. So I just ran down to the local store and I picked up some Play-Doh. It's cheap enough and it'll do the job just fine because all we need it for is to build a little bit of a dam around where we're going to cast our mold. So if I can get the Play-Doh out of its container here. Essentially we're going to pick our spot there and we're going to use the Play-Doh just to build a dam around where we're going to pour the filler. I like to go a little bit bigger width and length than what I think we're going to need. That way we have plenty to work with. So now we have our little dam area built up, and I just kind of went through and made sure that it's squished down to the bottom pretty good. And it's connected just so it'll hold itself up. You know, there's not going to be a lot of pressure in there with the filler in it when we pour the mold. But you just want to make sure it's relatively secure. That's kind of the reason why I like using a clay or a clay substitute instead of using tape. In the past, I've had some kind of peel open and get deformed due to the tape not holding up that well with a little bit of pressure inside. So next up, we have to spray a little mold release inside of here, and then we can mix up our filler and we can pour it. So let me grab the mold release and the body filler and we'll move forward. For your mold release, you can buy a mold release for like casting resin or things like that on like Amazon or online. Or I like to use just like a clear coat. You don't need a lot, just something to give you a little bit of a film to release your casting. All right, while our mold release dries, we're gonna mix up our filler that we're gonna cast the profile in. This is just some cheap filler. I don't even know where I got it. I always try to keep a little bit of just cheap body filler around just for this reason. So we'll just kind of guess at how much we think it's going to take. Then we'll take our activator, just knead it up a little bit. Since I don't use it a lot, I really like to make sure it's kneaded up really well. And we'll put our activator across. Now I'm not weighing our filler and our activator because it's not that critical. If it dries a little bit too fast or the chemicals in it, we're not putting any paint over or worried about delamination. We're just worried about casting this and getting our profile. So then to make it super runny so it kind of runs into place, we're going to add some fiberglass resin to it to thin it out. Then from there, we can just mix it. From there, we can peel off our paper from our mixing board. This way we can just kind of pour it right into the clay or the Play-Doh dam. Then we can take our body filler over and just kind of let it run off of there and fill up our dam. Guess I can turn that paper around so you guys can see it a little bit better. I could have added a little bit more resin to it so it was a little more runny. Then we will just let that sit and harden up, and then we'll have an accurate casting of the profile we need. Now that everything's hardened up, we can pop our mold off there and peel off our Play-Doh or our clay. And at this point, I mean, we might be able to reuse this. Yep, I'll give it a shot, so I'll put it back in the container and save for future use. But if you don't want to save it, I think that little tub was 99 cents, so it works in a pinch. I still prefer the modeling clay over the filler or over the Play-Doh. So then I'll come back over this a little bit of lacquer thinner and just wipe off any residue and our mold release. So here is our initial cast profile. And what I like to do is I'll go over to the belt grinder and we'll just clean this up a little bit. That way we have nice clean edges and it'll be easier to transfer this profile onto our steel stock to make our pullmax or our lennox tooling. So now with our little cast profile piece here, you can see everything's kind of just cleaned up, edges are dressed, so it'll just be a lot easier to transfer this profile to our steel to make our tooling. So that's going to be what's next. I'm going to go back to the steel rack, pull off the material we're going to use for this, and get some blanks cut, and we can transfer our information over. So I'm over here at our fabrication table, and this is just 3/4 by 3/4 square stock. It's just 1018 mild steel. This is usually what I make my profile tooling out of for the lennox. I don't have to use a higher carbon steel or something that can be heat treated because we're doing such low production run on individual pieces. I don't think we'd ever wear it out. I have some tooling that I use a handful of times a year, and I've been using it probably for the past 10 years, and it's still not worn out or even shows any signs of wear. So for me, I don't feel that I need to use a tool steel or something I can send out to be heat treated. So I've applied die chem to the outside here. You can see that it's blue, and then I have put a scribe mark where the center line of our section is. So what I'll do is I will take our body filler casting and we will line up the peak of that on the center line, and then we can scribe our line. So that'll be the next thing, and then we can machine that out from there. So here you can see our scribe lines of our profile, where it comes across the piece up to the peak and down. So this will become our male die, and the next step is I'm going to chuck this up in the mill, and we will mill out this profile, get it close, and then I'll finish it up by hand with a grinder and a file. All right, so there is our machined male side of the die, and I cleaned it up on the belt grinder after using the Bridgeport just to kind of rough mill out the majority, and I ground up to our scribe line, and I could see that with the die chem on there. So then if we take our Bondo mold piece here and get it lined up, because you have to make sure everything's centered up, and hold it on there, it fits pretty nice. So from here, what I will do is I will take our male piece and I will overlay it on another piece of 3/4 by 3/4 1018 bar stock, and I will scribe the profile from the male die onto the blank, and I will machine it out, creating the female die, and I can test fit it together and finish it with just standard metal files. So that's the next step in the process. So again, here we have our male side of the die, and then the female side of the die. You saw that I just rough cut that out on the Bridgeport. It was a little sloppy looking, but again, we're just rough chewing out the majority of this material. And then I went over to the belt grinder and I dressed it up to our die chem line. So you can see, if I get it lined up right, it fits together pretty good. So from this point forward, we can take our body filler mold, lay it to the side, we can label it, put it on the shelf, whatever we want. So from here, I'm going to put this in our fixture and we're going to weld the stems on it, and the stems are what hold it into the Lennox or the pullmax machine. So I'm not going to dress anything else on the inside of the tooling until after that's done, because when it goes into our fixture, we need to make sure that everything's nice and crisp so we can line everything up nice and straight. So if we went ahead and radiused all our lead ins and lead outs, it would allow a little bit of room for error. So I'm going to leave it just like it is. We're going to put it in our fixture and we're going to weld the stems on it using the TIG welder and get it ready to go. And then after we get it welded, then we'll come back in, we'll lay out where our lead ins and our lead outs need to be and get everything dressed, final sanded, and we'll polish the the face of the tool. That way everything's nice and smooth. We don't get any transference of grinding marks, or we don't get any minor shrinking and stretching due to those corresponding tool marks. So next up, let's get the fixture out. We'll TIG weld our stems on there, and we will get this tooling wrapped up so we can do a test profile. All right, I got a little lacquer thinner here on a towel, and I'm just going to wipe off the die chem where we're going to weld. So then what we're going to do is we've got this little fixture here that our tool goes in, and then we can slide the stems in, and we can clamp everything together and get everything lined up, and then we can weld it in the fixture so it holds everything together. I do have a couple different ones. I've got this one, which is for a tighter, like a smaller thickness overall tool, and then I have one that's for larger. Instead of using 3/4 by 3/4, I might have to use 1.5 by 1.5 just to get a more aggressive profile. So on this one, we use the small fixture just because our tool fits in there really nice. So let me grab some clamps and we'll get everything lined up and clamped in place. So then we'll set our welder up, and we're set at electrode negative for TIG. We're set at about 160 amps, which will work for what we're doing. Go ahead and turn our argon on, and we're ready to weld up the tooling. Then we can unclamp it out of our fixture. We can flip them over and we can weld the other side of the stems. Now that our tooling is welded, we have to prepare for our lead-ins and lead-outs. So what that does is it puts a radius where the material is going to enter and exit through the tooling. That way it doesn't get hard edge tooling marks on it. This is pretty gradual, so we're not going to have very aggressive lead-ins and lead-outs, but I'm going to prepare for that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to spray some die chem on the face of the tooling, and then I will come back and I will scribe roughly about 1/4 inch in on both sides, maybe a little under since this isn't aggressive, and that'll give me a reference point where I can do my radius so everything's nice and even. And I'll come over here to the edge and I'll relieve this top and bottom so these edges don't leave tooling marks as well. Now that our tooling is all polished up, you can see how nice and smooth it is. We've got our lead-ins and lead-outs here. I roughed those in on the belt grinder to get the radius and feather these edges out. And then I went over to the vise and I used a rotary flap wheel, and I came back with a DA and softened everything up. And then I just used the ball door pedestal buffer to shine everything up with black and green rouge. So moving forward, the next step is we're going to head over to the pullmax, or the lennox that I use, and we're going to set everything up, and we are going to do a test run on a piece of aluminum. I like to use aluminum in the test because the aluminum is so much softer than steel, so it will show any tooling marks or anything like that that needs to be addressed much easier than if we did it in steel. So we'll do a test in aluminum, get everything dialed in, and then we'll be ready to move forward with putting this peaked profile into the section on the Cadillac. Currently, the lennox is set up with a tipping tool in it, so we're going to take that out. So I'm going to loosen our clamp here, lower the tool post, pull the eccentric pin out, and then we can slide that out. We can take the lower tool out and pop this set screw loose, and we take the top tool out. Then we can put our tools in the Lennox. We'll start with our lower tool post, then we'll put our top tool post in, snug up the set screw, and slide it together. Then we'll adjust up our lower tool post so we can line everything up, and there's an eccentric here. So we can scoot that over and get everything lined up. And there it looks pretty decent. I'd say right about there is good enough for our test. So I will snug up our pinch bolts here for the lower tool post slide. And we'll flip over our little eccentric lock there. So for our test, I just have this scrap piece of 3003 H14 aluminum. It's 063 thick. And I moved the backstop up here just for the test. When it comes time to putting this profile in the actual piece, I'll make a guide fence that we will attach to the piece we're putting as our edge. So I'm going to lower this down just out of the way for now, and I'll go ahead and turn the Lennox on, and then we will put this profile in using multiple passes to slowly put the profile into the aluminum. All right, so after our test here, you can see that it put the peaked profile in. We don't have any really aggressive tooling marks anywhere that I can feel. And again, this is an aluminum, so if there are any minor tooling marks or scratches, that shouldn't translate into the steel. So at this point, I think we're good, and we're gonna go over and compare it to the profile on the original hood and see how it looks. And then we can lay out for our guide fence on the actual piece, and we can put this profile in. So here at the hood, I can take this and I can lay it up against it, and it matches pretty close. This little bit of extra material here is holding it off, and the shape of the hood, but if I just push down on it a little bit, the profile is nice and even and matches up fairly well. So at this point, I'm going to call it good. We'll do our guide fences and get ready to run the real profile. So what needs to happen is we have to put that profile right here in the center of this panel. And this white line is the actual center line. So to be able to guide the panel through the tool, we need something as an edge or a guide. And when I did the test, I used the guide fence with a piece of tube on it, but that's not going to work on this because it's an odd shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from the center line over on our tool to the edge of the tool, and I'll measure that and lay it out here, and that'll give us our offset of one side of the tool. And then I will measure the length, and I will cut a piece of aluminum. Usually it's 1 inch by 1 inch angle, and then I just cut it 2 inches by whatever this length is, and I'll bend it into 1 inch by 1 inch angle on the press brake. And then I'll use our kick shrinker and stretcher to shrink and stretch this to fit the contour, and then I can Cleco or carpet tape that onto this piece at our offset line, and that will give us our guide fence that we're going to use. So I'm going to get the aluminum angle made up, and we can get that to fitting. got the guide fence all shaped and fit and clecoed in place, and it's measured off of the white center line. So compared to the weld seam and the haze, it might look like it runs off center, but the weld seam itself was slightly off center. But based off of the center line from measuring from edge to edge, forward and back, the guide fence is 1 3/8 off of the center line. So now it's time to take this piece off, and we will run it through the lennox and put the profile in. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to taper it off so it'll be nice and crisp, and then kind of taper and fade away as it comes back before it meets the secondary panel that'll cover the top of the engine. So I'm also going to peak it here, kind of close that in, but I'll do that after the fact with a hammer and dolly and just chase that line back in. So let's head over to the lennox and we will get the profile put in the panel. So this will be the same process as it was when we did the test with aluminum. I'm going to lower the tool post all the way down and then start the machine and work up in stages. We can't do the full profile in one shot because we'll get chatter and tooling marks. So we have to increase the pressure in between the upper and lower die incrementally as we put the profile in. So that's what we're going to do. With the profile work done, let's get this clecoed back in place, and we can pull our guide fence off and kind of clean this up, kind of see how it looks at this stage. So I've got just a little bit of lacquer thinner here on a towel, and I can wipe off our Sharpie marks and our center line here. And with the weld seam being here, you can't see it the greatest, but the peak is there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back just with a DA, and I'm going to lightly sand that. That way we can see that defined peak a little bit better, just to get rid of the weld haze and all of that stuff around the edges. All right, so I sanded just around the peak profile here. I used 80 grit on a DA, and then I switched over to just a red Scotch-Brite pad on a DA as well, just to kind of soften those scratches up. So hopefully you guys can see this, the peak definition. I'll move the camera and kind of highlight it a little bit, so if it's hard to see at this angle, you guys can check it out. I do have cleco holes that I need to weld up here and there. And then, like I said, I'm going to come in, because I ran this right off the panel. So I'm going to come in, like there's our center line. I'm going to kind of bring that in, kind of shaped like that. And I'll close that off with the hammer and dolly. I'm going to trim this excess off first. That way, you know, I don't make the peak too low and then end up having to cut it off and have to duplicate it again. So I'll get all that laid out, but I'm going to peak it a little bit like that and close the end of the peak profile off. And then back here, I kind of faded it out a little bit. So I would come to point A, and then on the next one I would stop a little bit farther, a little bit farther, a little bit farther. That way it kind of fades out that definition, and I just have to come in with a hammer and dolly and just kind of clean that up just a little bit. But at this point, the peak profile is in there, and hopefully this was really informative on how I transfer the information of an existing profile, whether it be a bead or a peak, using the clay dam body filler to make a mold, transfer that to some steel stock machine and fine fit the dies and the tooling, welding the stems on, and up to putting this profile in. So I'm going to wrap this video up. So hopefully, again, you guys found this informative to kind of see what is involved to do little details like this. So thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate all the continued support you guys are giving. Make sure if you haven't subscribed yet, go down, hit that subscribe button. You know, it means a lot. It helps get the channel out to more people. And if you can, tell a friend, share it on your Facebook, your Instagram page. Anything that can help me grow this channel is greatly appreciated, and I do appreciate all the continued support you guys are giving. Drop down in the comment section, let me know what you thought of this video, any recommendations for certain profiles or videos you want to see in the future, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.